Hey, Logan, welcome back. We're going to do section three. Section three is kind of like a mismatch of a bunch of different things that happened, but they're all really important in the context of slavery versus non-slavery and the Civil War. So they're not really, they don't really fit within our timeline moving forward, but they're huge events in American history. And the first thing we're talking about is the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And these are the two main contenders for the Illinois Senate seat. One is Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas, of course, is the guy that got the Kansas-Nebraska Acts passed. We've seen him before. And he's going to get challenged by a young and up-and-comer, a young Abraham Lincoln, who even when he's young looks old. And actually, Lincoln's going to lose the election. He's going to lose to Stephen Douglas. Spoiler alert. But his speeches and his debate performance becomes so legendary that in 1860 he becomes the main candidate for president, even though he lost to Stephen Douglas in the run for the Senate. So what happens is the Whig Party falls apart. R.I.P. Whig Party. They grew out of what was the tatters of the Federalist Party, and what splits them apart is slavery. The two sides within the party, pro and anti-slavery, simply couldn't get along anymore. They shouldn't have been in the same party anyway. So a bunch of the people who were formerly, Whigs and formerly Free Soilers break apart. A bunch of Democrats who were also Free Soilers join a bunch of other abolitionists and form a party dedicated to the ending of slavery. And, they have other stances as well, but since both parties seem to be kind of avoiding the topic, they realized they were never going to get rid of slavery as long as those two parties were in place. So everybody left, any Free Soiler or abolitionist left the Whigs. And that left the Whigs with too few people. And they're just going to die. They're going to go away. And the new party they created is called the Republican Party. The Republican Party in 1854 performs well, but doesn't win the presidency. And then in 1860, they're going to win the presidency finally. In 1854, it's not a presidential election. They win a bunch of House seats. 1856, they don't win the presidency. 1860, Abraham Lincoln runs, and they do win the presidency. In 1854, 105 people were elected to the House of Representatives. That's not a majority, but it's a pretty big minority for a brand new party. Remember, when a new party gets born, it usually takes a while to get running. This shows you how powerful the anti-slavery movement was in America. Remember, most Americans do live in the North, but that doesn't mean all Northerners were anti-slavery. There were still some Whigs floating around, but they're just not going to get elected. So the Democrats actually end up being the majority in Congress at this point because the Republican Party was not around long enough to really get moving well enough. Very quickly after this, though, the Republicans are going to become the majority because majority of them in the House because the majority of America was anti-slave. And this does officially make the two political parties we still have around today, the two political parties in America, the Republicans and the Democrats. But it's important to note that the Republicans back then, very different than the Democrats now, and the Democrats now, very different than the Democrats back then. Obviously, neither the Republicans or Democrats now would support slavery, and the truth is not a whole lot of Democrats supported slavery. But keeping their party together was more important to the Democrats, and they were able to keep the party together, and most of the Southerners were Democrats. So the Democratic Party becomes kind of a mix of the Northerners that didn't want to break away from the Democratic Party, but certainly weren't pro-slavery, and Southerners who were pro-slavery. And then everyone else joins the Republicans, which is why the Republicans become dominant relatively quickly. They put up a serious candidate for presidency in 1856. I can't even remember who it is, but they don't win that one. They do win with Lincoln a little bit later. In between 1856 and 1857, we get one of the saddest things in American history, which is the Dred Scott decision. It was a truly, truly dreadful decision. Dred Scott, dreadful. It was, yep. This is Dred Scott himself. He was a slave. He traveled to the North with his slave owner, U.S. Army doctor. Army doctors have to move around often. So his name is Dred Scott. Sanford is a guy from the South that was suing Sanford was his owner. So when Dred Scott went to the North as a slave of the army doctor, he claimed that he was now a free man. So as a person in the North, in a state where slavery didn't exist, how could I be a slave? How can I be a slave in a state that doesn't recognize slavery? That was his question. Well, Sanford, his owner, said, it doesn't matter where I am, you're my property. And when I leave a state, my property doesn't cease to be my property. My luggage continues to be my luggage. My horse continues to be my horse no matter where I'm at. And the truth is, legally speaking, both of these are excellent arguments. And when we have a case where both sides have an excellent legal argument, we usually have to get the Supreme Court involved. And so the army doctor lived in Illinois and Wisconsin. Those are both states that didn't have slavery, but he was from the South originally. When he was in the army, he got forced to go elsewhere. And Scott said, look, I'm in Illinois. That's not a slave state. I'm free. And so the Supreme Court has to decide, is Dred Scott free now that he's in a free state, or does he remain the property of Sanford? And this is the Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time. Man, does he look like a happy-go-lucky guy, right? This is the kind of guy you invite to parties, am I right? A lot of fun on that one. His name is Roger B. Taney. And Roger B. Taney writes the decision, and it is an absolute death blow to, not death blow, but an absolute punch in the gut to the abolitionist movement. It totally sides with slave owners. He set up two things in America that it's going to take a civil war to change. The first one is that not only can Scott not sue, not only is he property, but he's not a citizen. A slave is not a citizen, and only citizens have the right to sue other citizens. So not only is Dred Scott still a slave and he loses his case, but no slave ever has the right, or no non-citizen ever has the right to sue in America. So they didn't even recognize that he was basically a human being. It was really demoralizing. Secondly, living in a free territory doesn't make you free. You're property. And property is protected by the Constitution, which means that you couldn't really get rid of property anywhere, including the Western states. So they said that Congress, the federal Congress, cannot prohibit slavery in a territory. States can prohibit slavery within their border, but the Constitution protects the right to property, and slaves are property. So if a state chooses on their own to outlaw slavery, they can, but until a territory becomes a state, they don't have the ability to make that decision. The government doesn't have the ability to make that decision. So basically, according to the Supreme Court, slavery had to exist out west. It's just how it is. So this, of course, destroys the Missouri Compromise, which was already dying. It makes it so the Missouri Compromise goes against the Constitution. Slavery is essentially legal unless a state gets rid of it. Okay? This, of course, angers the abolitionists, but it is absolutely rejoiced by slave owners, by the Southerners. They had the ability to spread slavery across all of the new Western states. They even thought that they had the opportunity to challenge laws in northern states that got rid of slavery, saying that, slaves are property and you can't tell anybody anywhere that they can't have property. So they kind of had their sights on spreading slavery to the entire country. Northerners, incredibly outraged, as they should be. As I mentioned, this is a dreadful decision. The Northerners were outraged. They really had hoped that with the Wilmot Proviso eventually getting passed, with those California senators on their side, they had really hoped that slavery would be kept in the South because the majority of Americans were really anti-slavery. And slavery was an addiction for the South, but it wasn't necessary out West. They felt the will of the people would hold true, and they'd be able to get rid of slavery out West. Ironically, some Northerners saw the Dred Scott decision as a good thing because it outraged so many people that they felt that the abolitionist cause would be advanced. They'd start gaining more and more members. They'd get more and more people involved in the fight to end slavery. And one of those people who did churn their views around is a guy named Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln held the view for most of his life that slavery was evil, but if the Southerners choose to do evil things, then the Northerners don't really have the right to tell them what to do. So he believed in not spreading slavery, but not getting rid of slavery. And he's going to change his mind after the Dred Scott decision. He's going to change his mind after some other abolitionist activities. All right. So Abraham Lincoln joins attempts to run for the Senate of the United States of America. And Abraham Lincoln challenges Douglas, who's the current senator from Illinois, to a bunch of debates. And these debates become highly publicized. And a bunch of reporters report on it. And they start putting every word in the newspapers. The Lincolns never said he's anti-slavery. He actually just wanted to ban the spread of slavery. Most Southerners saw him as a real threat because he was incredibly popular, very persuasive. He's very good at what he did. And the Republican Party kind of quickly put him on a pedestal and said, this is our guy. So he goes around and he does a bunch of debates with Stephen Douglas, very highly publicized. And their big question was, what role will slavery play in the new territories? Not should slavery be legal in America, but what should we do with those new Western territories that are going to be admitted to the Union? And as we know now, those Western territories became like 28 states or something like that eventually. So it was a big deal at the time. Douglas won the election. He became the Senate. But Lincoln became famous for how well he argued against slavery, how well he presented those points. And all of the anti-slave people in America and all the Republicans very quickly recognized this is going to be a guy that's going places. And 4 years later, he's going to win the presidency. The Bleeding Kansas and the Dred Scott decision was something that tipped off a guy named John Brown. And as you can see by the picture, not a particularly sane individual. This guy was a zealot. This guy would do anything for his cause, and his cause was abolition. And so he's going to attack a federal armory in Harper's Ferry. And he truly believes that God has called upon him to end slavery. And when you believe God calls you upon to do something, you're not going to stop for anything. So he and a group of supporters, mostly his kids, feel like they're gonna take up an armory. All of the abolitionists are going to rally to his cause, and they're going to start a rebellion. And they're going to get all the local slaves to join them, and they're going to march through the South, and they're going to free all the slaves. And they went and attacked an ammunition storage facility. They took it because there was like 4 soldiers there or something like that. Then they were eventually surrounded by a federal garrison of troops, and eventually they were killed. But what this really did is scare the bejesus out of the South. Again, they saw this guy became a poster child for abolitionists. This guy became what the North is willing to do to end slavery. So like much the way the fugitive slave catchers and the bounty hunters became a symbol for how evil the slave side would get, John Brown became a symbol for how evil the anti-slavery could be. And they became the symbols of how radical and crazy the other side was going to be. Brown gets arrested. He was not killed. He was hanged publicly in 1859 for treason. He attacked a federal base of federal munitions. He killed American soldiers. That's treason. So he was hanged. But the big thing is the North celebrated John Brown. Lots of towns rang their bell in honor of him, much the way that Southerners gave Preston Brooks the canes. The Northerners celebrated John's death. Now, the truth is, John Brown's not a hero, and he shouldn't be, held up as one. But because he championed the cause and was willing to fight, he was celebrated as a hero. The North and South, the South, however, saw him as a big warning of how bad things could get. And as a result, the North and the South got even farther apart. All right, that's Section 3, guys. When you get back, I need you to be through your study guide on Section 3, and I'll get you points on your quizzes for those. As always, email me if you have any questions. Have a good day.